Okay, so this is day 4 of leadership lessons from Genesis. And so today we're going to do chapter 4. And, oh, hey, how are you doing, Lauren? Alright, yay, lots of hearts. I'm still getting a hold of this Periscope thing, trying to do it, record it, and figure out how to download it properly onto YouTube so that my international people can translate it. Good morning, how are you? Oh, Xavier's watching too. Good morning, Xavier. Alright, so instead of watching me today, good morning. I'm going to have you watch the diffuser and the plant while I read. Isn't that pretty? I have got the music on in the background as well. Yay. Alright, so just to recap, chapter 1 we learned that we are to lead because we were created in God's image. So we need to lead in our gifts. Chapter 2 was about good communication and making sure that we as leaders are precise in our direction and that we empower our people. And then chapter 3 was the great fall. And we learned a lot of lessons from all the characters involved in that, from the serpent, Eve, Adam, and God, and how each of them were able to lead or influence somebody else. And so today we are going into chapter 4, where we begin to see how the next generation were growing in their relationship with God and their life. And this is actually one of my favorite chapters in the Bible, believe it or not. So let me go ahead and read it. All right. So, chapter 4. Now Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, and said, I have acquired a man from the Lord. Then she bore again, this time his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of the sheep, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. And in the process of time it came to pass that Cain brought an offering of the fruit of the ground to the Lord. Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock of their fat. And the Lord respected Abel and his offering, but he did not respect Cain and his offering. And Cain was very angry, and his countenance fell. So the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry, and why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin lies at your door, and its desire is for you, but you shall rule over it. Now Cain talked with Abel his brother, and it came to pass that when they were in their field, that Cain rose up against Abel his brother and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, where is Abel your brother? He said, I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper? And he said, what have you done? The voice of your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. So now you are cursed from the earth, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you till the ground, it shall no longer yield its strength to you. A fugitive and a vagabond you shall be in the earth. And Cain said to the Lord, my punishment is greater than I can bear. Surely you have driven me out this day from the face of the ground. I shall be hidden from your face. I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond on the earth, and it will happen that anyone who finds me will kill me. And the Lord said to him, therefore, whoever kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord set a mark on Cain, lest anyone find him should kill him. Then Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod, on the east of Eden. And Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. And he built a city and called the name of the city after the name of his son Enoch. To Enoch was born Irad, and Irad begat Mehushal, and Mehushal begot Methushael, and Methushael begot Lamech. Then Lamech took for himself 2 wives. The names of one was Ada, and the name of the second was Zillah. And Ada bore Jabal. He was the father of those who dwell in the tents and have livestock. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all things who play the harp and the flute. And as for Zillah, she also bore Tubal-Cain, an instructor of every craftsman in bronze and iron. And the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. Then Lamech said to his wife, Ada and Zillah, hear my voice. Wives of Lamech, listen to my speech. For I have killed a man for wounding me, even a young man for hurting me. If Cain shall be avenged 7-fold, then Lamech 77-fold. And Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son and named him Seth. For God has appointed another seed for me of Abel, with whom Cain killed. And as for Seth, to him also a son was born, and he named him Enosh. Then men began to call on the name of the Lord. Okay. So hopefully, I didn't distract you too much attempting to read those names. They're kind of difficult. I tried to practice them last night, but they didn't quite roll off my tongue, so forgive me. All right, so what I found most exciting in this chapter was, well, first let's talk about Eve, because that's what John Maxwell pointed out in his commentary about how Eve, when she gave birth to Cain, her words were, I have acquired a man from the Lord. And that never jumped out to me until just recently while I was reading this. It was, here she had been sent out of the garden, and she had this huge punishment. Here she had given birth, and it was quite painful. And yet, she was rejoicing and giving God the credit for this son. And that is, I never realized that, but what that points out is, in spite of what had happened, she still had a relationship with God, and she still acknowledged that God was involved, and that's a really good point. Now, we go to where Cain and Abel were bringing their sacrifices to the Lord. And when I was reading that last night, what jumped out at me was the fact that it shows that they had a relationship with God as well. Because if not, they wouldn't have done that. That would have been just something for the parents. But they obviously had a relationship with God where they were able to tell whether or not God was happy with them, or whether God was displeased with the relationship or with the sacrifice. And I was thinking about that last night, because when we do something, we always look for approval. And as leaders, we need to keep that in the back of our mind when we're leading people, that the people are going to act, and whether they say it or they don't, they're waiting for some sort of approval or feedback from us. If you remember, we were talking about a good leader says, does, and then evaluates. Well, the people underneath us are still doing that same process, but the difference is when they are in their evaluate part, they're not only just evaluating themselves but they're also looking for our evaluation on their actions. So we need to be considerate of that. So anyways, it's interesting to see that Adam and Eve, in spite of their fall, that they were still able to pick themselves up and bring relationship between God and their siblings, or God and their offspring, and pass that down. Now, the part that I often talk about when I go visit different churches and I give my personal testimony about being kidnapped and having lived through somebody else's sin, because the people who kidnapped me and the system that did everything, separated me from my birth family for 36 years, that was pretty awful, but that was somebody else's sin. And it's just sin is in the world. Whether we cause it or we're the victims of somebody else's sin, we need to realize that we are still in control of the way we react to it. And this is the scripture that I often repeat. It says, if you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin lies at the door, and its desire is for you, but you shall rule over it. So I find this line very, very exciting and empowering, because what it's saying is you're still in control of what's going on in your life. Whether you brought sin upon yourself or somebody else brought sin upon yourself, God is saying that sin is going to be at your door. They're always going to be there trying for an opportunity. Just like when Eve was close to the tree, we talked about there was a vulnerable moment. So if you get yourself into a place where you're vulnerable, it doesn't matter. You still, in the next line, is, and its desire is for you, but you shall rule over it. To me, that last part of, Genesis 4:7, but you shall rule over it, I have that underlined in my Bible, in all my Bibles. I have lots of Bibles. I love Bibles. And I'm like, wow, you shall rule over it. So right there, God gives us a command that no matter what is going on, we have the commandment to rule over sin so that it doesn't continually escalate into something big, and so that it doesn't go into the next generation because we didn't respond correctly. Can you imagine what would have happened differently if Adam and Eve had reacted differently after the serpent had tempted them and questioned them and gotten them to rethink God's leadership, etc., etc. But even though the serpent was there waiting for the vulnerable moments, they each had an opportunity. Adam could have stopped it when Eve presented her opportunity to him. So that was his moment of vulnerability when he should have ruled over it. And here we're talking with Cain. God is being very specific, having a conversation with Cain, and he's saying, basically, this is the way it works. You know this. And he's reminding him, why are you sad? You understand. If you do right, good things are going to happen. And if you do bad, bad things are going to happen. In other words, you're to blame, but you're also in control. You can fix it. So this is what God is telling Cain. And then what just blows my mind was that here they just had this conversation, a very deep conversation. And then God says to Cain, where is Abel, your brother? Well, here God just reminded him, if you do right, you'll be accepted. And if you do wrong, then sin is there. So you wouldn't expect that at that very next moment, after hearing from God, that Cain would then lie. Right there. God gave him the answer, and then he just lies. And he gets defensive with his lie as well. He said, I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper? So first he says, I don't know, which is a complete lie. He knows exactly what happens. And then he tries to twist it to try to get the blame off of him, say, am I my brother's keeper? He tries to change the subject. And, God just got done telling him what the consequences were for doing wrong, and here he just lies. So, and then God gives him his punishment. As a good leader, you have to have some sort of justice. You have to be somebody of your word. When you say something is going to happen and the consequences come, you need to let the consequences happen because that's a result of their actions. I'm not saying vengeance. I'm just saying the consequences that were laid out. So, anyway, so then God just lets him know that I know you're lying because I hear the blood crying. Plus, I am God. I do see things. So, anyways. But what I noticed is that Cain does not show a sign of remorse. Instead, he is scared because he doesn't think he can handle the punishment. And I thought, wow, here is another opportunity where instead of accepting the sin, he could have humbled himself before the Lord. And it might have been an entirely different situation. We don't know. But I just see a missed opportunity here. And then he goes on to say, this punishment is greater than I can bear. And then he says, I shall be hidden from your face. And I think that part is very sad because I know in my own life, whenever I felt like I was so far away from God because I knew I was in sin, there was a sadness in my heart that I didn't like, It feels so good to be in right relationship with God so that you can have those intimate conversations. But when sin comes in, it's so hard to have that relationship with God because you're consumed with guilt and sadness and remorse. And then there is a divide. So Cain is stuck in that. But God even gives grace. Even though Cain does not humble himself at this point, he doesn't have revelation or anything, but God still puts a mark on him, which shows me that God showed mercy and grace. And I want to believe it's because God still was hoping that Cain would turn around and humble himself. So it goes on, and then we learn some generations. We actually learn about 5 generations of Cain that come about. And I was trying to figure out, well, what happened? What did Cain teach his next generation? And it shows us that by the 5th generation, Cain's legacy was still there. That lesson of that mistake was still being taught when the 5th generation, Lamach has this speech with his wife. And I thought, oh, okay, finally somebody in the family gets it. They understand what Cain had done and the consequences. And they're applying the legacy of Cain onto his own life so that he can understand. And then he's trying to teach it to his wife. And emphasize the sin, the punishment, and the consequences. So here is Lamach, 5th generation of Cain, and he has this little speech that he gives to his wives, because he had 2. And he emphasizes it twice. He said, Ada and Zillah, hear my voice. And he repeats it. Wives of Lamach, listen to my speech. So he's emphasizing, hear me, follow what I'm saying. And then he confesses that he's killed 2 men. And then he also confesses that if Cain should be avenged 7-fold, then Lamech 77-fold. So I think he's showing that the legacy of Cain was passed down. He understands, and he understands the difference between Cain and Lamech is Lamech had the example of Cain as something to think back and refer to. So if you remember when I was talking yesterday, I was saying that everything we do, we need to be in thought. And because that's where sin comes from. If we don't have proper thoughts and we don't think things through properly, then we just act based on what we see and what it appears, as opposed to the Word of God, which is the right way, the way that's going to keep us right, the way that's going to keep us away from sin, the way that's going to keep us from having to live through the consequences of wrong action. So Lamech had the testimony of his forefather, and yet he still killed not just 1, but 2 men. And then he had the remorse. He said, oh, no. Okay. So, then the next thing we learn, it just kind of jumps. And then it goes back to Adam and Eve, where Eve is now having a third son. And she recognizes that this son, Seth, is going to, in her mind, replace Abel, which I thought that was odd because I don't think any child can replace another child. But anyways, it was important for the writer to put this in here, because at the very last line it says, then men began to call on the name of the Lord. So what I see in here was that Eve recognized what had gone on, and she had felt the loss of her son, and she had suffered all this pain, and now she has another son, so she has joy again. But obviously in her joy, she began to raise him properly, because Seth ends up having another son, so her grandson, Enosh. And then when Enosh is born, then it says, the men began to call on the name of the Lord. So through Cain, we had 5 generations, so 6 generations had gone by, and it seems like the relationship with God was there, but it wasn't very close. And then here comes Seth. So Seth bores Enosh. So now we're talking 3 generations down from Eve. But because Eve, obviously Adam and Eve had raised him right and then influenced, now they're starting to come back to the Lord 3 generations. So as leaders, we need to keep in mind that we're in control. So it doesn't matter where we've been in the past, where we are now, the sins and mistakes that we make. We just have to recognize that the way this world works is that sin is always at our heels, whether it's our sin or somebody else's sin. But God commands us that we need to take control over it. So when we want to apply this to our businesses, we just need to keep in the forefront that this is the way it works. Pick yourself up, get right before the Lord, and then do it right. Do it right the next time. That way it doesn't pass on 6 generations later. Hopefully it'll be only 1 generation or 2 generations. They'll get it right because you got it right. So that's what I have for you guys today. And I hope you enjoyed it, and look forward to Periscoping with you tomorrow.